Welcome to the Neuromodulation Podcast, presented to you by the International Neuromodulation Society. Dive into the forefront of today's emerging neuromodulation techniques, insights, and ethical and clinical applications. Subscribe now to join the multidisciplinary collaboration of medical care providers, scientists, and engineers who are part of the global conversation that's shaping the future of healthcare.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. First thing of the day. The brain has to kick into gear.
That was Professor Marc Russo doing a mic check for us here at the Neuromodulation Podcast. I'm your host, Mandy Soleil, and I am honored to interview Professor Russo, who is the immediate past president of the International Neuromodulation Society. His tenure as president spanned September 2022 to the start of September 2024, where he passes the baton of leadership to the coincidingly esteemed Professor Konstantin Slavin. We'll have another episode of the show to gain insight into Professor Slavin's vision for the coming 3 years of his term. But today's episode is devoted to hearing Professor Russo's observations on the contributions of the International Neuromodulation Society as a whole, a globally engaged community of clinicians, researchers, engineers, technologists, and curious minds. Dr. Russo is presently practicing at Hunter Pain Clinic in Newcastle, Australia, and in his term as INS immediate past president, he will continue to serve the INS in support of scientific development and awareness of neuromodulation. But before we dive into the interview, it's important that listeners have an opportunity to understand just what the INS has been able to accomplish under Professor Russo's leadership. I'm going to read an excerpt from President Russo's closing presidential remarks to give you a flavor of what his term has entailed. We have had record quality and impact factor standing of the journal under the expert leadership of our editor-in-chief, Robert Levy. Well-received webinars, journal clubs, and now podcasts that provide members and potential new members with state-of-the-art education. A most remarkable set of scientific congresses in Barcelona, Mumbai, and Vancouver. Really exciting INS and chapter scientific meetings planned for 2025 and 2026. We are so looking forward to them. New INS chapters formed to champion neuromodulation in Israel, Kazakhstan, and Portugal, with others in the pipeline. A very healthy and engaged young neuromodulators and women in neuromodulation network with mentorship programs for physicians, nurses, and allied healthcare professionals. The latest versions of the INS's NACC and PACC guidance documents promoting best practices for the field. A burgeoning statistical primer series now in its third set of topics preparation to aid in our interpretation of neuromodulation literature. An institution of robust conflict of interest policies to ensure commercial independence of our societies and journals' executive leadership. Successful and invigorated societal relationships in the pain and brain spaces with like-minded organizations, in-demand research grants, which continue to support neuromodulation research and attract record applicants year on year, and Professor Russo continues to contribute an ongoing spirit of generosity and passion in this field, which you will come to hear firsthand in this interview. With that, I welcome Professor Marc Russo to the show. It is such a pleasure to have you here.
Good morning, Mandy.
You've been the president of the INS for going on 3 years now. Can you share what reflections you have from this term?
Sure. Look, I think it's been very busy. And my first reflection is that each presidency seems to get busier and busier. So there's definitely an uptick in responsibilities, activities that the INS is engaged in, and perhaps also challenges as well. So I guess my reflection is that we've had a number of things come up, and one of the things I'm most proud of is the way I've asked people to step up and do things, and they've pulled together, and there's really been a very cohesive response amongst INS members, which I've been very pleased to see.
What have you learned about leadership in this period?
I've learned that it's good to be humble in the position of leadership because you'll never have all the answers, and you'll get a lot of praise that will accrue to you for things you haven't actually done. It's the people around you that have actually done that. It's important to be humble, and in particular to point out to people and to recognize that the work that is coming to you as praise is really actually due to others. And I think When you're in a leadership position, sometimes, and maybe when you look at things from a political lens, you're thinking about how to stay up there and not be dragged down, or how to stop other people from climbing up. I think it's very different in a medical society, and you shouldn't take that lens. What you should be doing is focusing exactly on how to bring up the next group, how to mentor the next group of leaders, how to ensure that as you leave the stage and they take the stage, they're able to take what you've done and take it further. So that's the kind of things that I've learnt, really, is it's not necessarily about you, it's about the next generation.
It makes me think a little bit like being a captain of a ship, guiding the direction, but rather unseen. When there's an iceberg, a particular challenge ahead, how have you guided the INS through challenges that have arisen? And are there any notable ones that would be useful to share?
Yes, look, I think we certainly have had challenges. They fall into two types of categories. We've got our continuous challenges and then the specific challenges that have occurred. So our continuous challenges are about ensuring that we continue to deliver high quality education, high quality involvement of young neuromodulators, and help them grow into the field and develop their skill set. So it's about delivering content and making sure content is relevant, as well as, of course, supporting research and ensuring that research gets funded where we have an ability to do this. And the INS has its own research program that we fund, and we'll be continuing that going into the future. So there are continuous challenges, and we match that by making sure that we have appropriate structure and process around that so that it continues regardless of who is going to be the president, for example. And then there's the specific challenges that have come up. And I think one of the interesting ones that's come up during my time has been the small group of people who've actually challenged that there is a role for neuromodulation and saying that it's a low yield procedure or a low medical value procedure. And I think the evidence is that that's exactly the opposite of the truth, but yet we've had to come and address this in different countries and jurisdictions.
Well, speaking of research, what are some of the advancements in the field that have come up during your presidency?
In particular, in this last 3 years, we've seen the development of closed loop monitoring techniques. So we're actually measuring what we're doing in different ways. That's been a fundamental change that I've seen recently. And separate from that is the concept of remote monitoring and remote programming. I was somewhat skeptical that this was really going to do much, but my eyes have been opened in this particular area. And I now realize how powerful an additional tool this is going to be. In addition to that, we've had an explosion of waveforms from different companies and different individuals. I've contributed to that myself with my own waveform. So making sure that we have access to multiple waveforms that will solve different problems in different people has been really important. And I think the last thing is really mechanisms. We've had some great work done on underpinning the mechanisms of spinal cord stimulation, for example. And so people like Scott Lemke, Myron Bixham, and others really have been contributing greatly to that in the last couple of years.
Excellent. And granted Professor Russo's deep interest in this topic, we're going to be hosting him for another episode. Part 2 will be a primer on research in the field of neuromodulation and how to get started in research. So stay tuned for that as well. Shifting to the patient experience for a moment, I'm from the United States, and we have a rather complex public and private medical insurance system, arguably in part due to the lack of research in the field. Neuromodulation procedures are often incredibly expensive for those living in the United States. We just recently interviewed a patient of deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease who's from Vancouver. Comparably, his entire procedure was free. Can you speak to what the ecosystem looks like for patients in Australia to receive neuromodulation care, and what cost looks like, whether or not there's an insurance system and the like?
Yes. So in some ways it's similar to the United States, but in other ways it's different. So we have, again, a private public healthcare system. So you can receive your care in either of these two. In the public, it's free. In the private, it's not free, but then you have private health funds that if you take out membership of that, then the majority of that amount is covered by your private health fund membership. What's different in Australia is that the private health funds, for example, don't really have an input into authorising something to occur. If you have membership and it's listed by the Therapeutic Goods Administration and there's a Medicare benefit item number for this to occur, then the procedure can occur. That It's a difference. The one thing I've seen is that whenever we get really good, high quality data across the field, what we discover is high quality results.
Mm.
And to some extent, it's not about doing another research study, another paper. That alone, I think, will never answer the question, is this being appropriately used? Is this cost effective? The best way is to include every single person who has a neuromodulation device in a registry, in an audit system, in a government database, whatever the system is. When you include everyone, then you have the answer in front of you. You're not taking a study and then extrapolating that to another population group and hoping and arguing backwards and forwards, does this study translate to this population group? You actually have the population group results in front of you. As we go forwards, I think we're going to see a shift in multiple countries to 100% data collection, registry formation, and that's going to prove the worth of neuromodulation. And I'm looking forward as we go down that pathway.
There's been some progress around that during your presidency, right?
Yes, that's right. Multiple countries are now rolling out actual data outcomes from their registries. Philippe Gregoire is working towards a pan-European registry, which I think is going to be a wonderful initiative. We've got an Australian registry that's just going to be starting later this year. So yeah, a number of countries are moving along this pathway, and I think it's an unstoppable and welcome outcome.
Exciting stuff.
I'd like to pivot a bit and get your thoughts on what it's been like to lead the INS through the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, that was a huge change for us as an organisation. Rob Levy was president during the pandemic, and really with him leading the team, we had to pivot dramatically in order to be able to continue to deliver quality education, for example. And that was where our webinars and our journal club was born. And we turned an idea into a reality in the space of just a few weeks, which I think was very dramatic. And Rob has gone on to continue to lead that with great distinction. That was maybe the first change, but the other changes more societal and I think going to be equally sustaining. And that is the fact that we've had the acceptance of telehealth for patients, which is something that we haven't had before really in the same manner. It's now seen very acceptable and sometimes even desirable by patients, especially when they live remote from clinics that conduct neuromodulation. So that's changed things in that we've then had to upskill how do you do good telehealth in the neuromodulation world. And also webinars and Zoom meetings and so forth have become more frequent. So we're seeing a change from perhaps the number of in-person meetings to the number of Zoom and remote monitoring delivered educational offerings. So there's been quite a few changes there.
Do you think that this has allowed the INS to reach more people with its content?
Absolutely. I think there's no question of that. To that end, that's been a great thing. I'm very pleased to have seen that development, although born out of a pandemic. And I think it's changed us as an organisation, as it has many organisations, in that we're now more nimble. We're now thinking more out of the box, if you like. So it makes you more dynamic in terms of responsive to things.
Do you have any advice you'd give to future leaders? We've got Professor Konstantin Slavin coming into his term. What guidance would you give him?
Well, I'm blessed in the fact that Konstantin is very experienced. He's been around the block quite a few times. He's going to slot just fantastically. So he doesn't need too much guidance from me. But in terms of your question, I guess thinking more generally, never underestimate the demands of the job. Applying adequate time apart from your other duties to the job, I think is critically important. It's easy to underestimate how much of this will take up of your life. So that's the first thing I would say. And then I think the second part is never feel that you have to do everything. The more you delegate, the more effective you become because you're ensuring that people can focus on individual components of work. And delegation also allows that person to then take ownership and responsibility and authorship for that work and allows them to have pride and autonomy and allows them to grow in the organization. So it has multiple benefits, not only from the person you give work to, but the person who actually does that work. And I guess the third is understand that you need to evolve. Nothing's fixed, nothing's rigid. If you're coming with rigid ideas, you might find that your ideas don't work for the new environment that you're in. So be prepared to change. Maintain core values, of course, that has to be critical, but otherwise be ready to evolve.
Whether it's a project you delivered on or one that you delegated to someone else, can you share a specific project that you feel particularly proud of from your presidency that has driven some sort of change or impact in the field of neuromodulation?
It'd actually be these podcasts, Mandy. I think this is a wonderful way to dive in depth into different areas. This is a reflection one. A number of our podcasts have been around particular experiences of individuals, how they've done something, or actually then just an interview about specific areas of neuromodulation. So that's really been taken up quite dramatically, which is good to see. So that'd be probably the first. A new statistics offering that we're doing of statistics primers. That again has really found a home, and people are requesting those details, and there's good downloads from the websites on that. So that would be another significant component, I would say. So there's some of the things that have contributed usefully.
And this reminds me of a recent webinar that we hosted around statistics. It was one of the best attended that we've ever had. Why do you think that statistics is something that the field is taking such an interest in?
Because mathematically, it's an incredibly dry, boring, and difficult concept. And I recognize from my own time, for more than a decade, skipping the methodology section of papers because I couldn't understand it. And that made me less of an ability to interpret the paper. So to have statistics described in simple, easy to understand terms that are relatable is just a wonderful way to be able to comfortably take that on board and use that. And as you use that, you become a better clinician, you become a better researcher, better able to appraise the mountain of data that almost assails us every day.
Reflecting on that, clearly you don't enjoy statistics. We learn a lot from what we don't enjoy or what doesn't go well. I'm curious if you could share an experience during your presidency where something didn't go as planned and what it taught you.
I think probably might take a year or two to actually refine that and look back in the rearview mirror. But where I'm standing at the moment, I think the one thing that either we haven't done well or perhaps I haven't done well would be reaching out to those people who have been critics of neuromodulation, reaching out to them early to try and understand their position and then provide education, look for common ground, have a discussion. I think like many things in our current modern life, there seems to be a setting of formal, entrenched positions from which thou shalt not deviate. And I think we lose the scientific method of inquiry when we do that kind of thing. And so I think perhaps an earlier reach out would have been opportune. And maybe that was a missed opportunity.
As neuromodulation technologies advance and as advancements like artificial intelligence come up, what ethical considerations would you say that neuromodulation practitioners would most benefit from taking into consideration?
I can see two separate strands to answer your question. The first strand would be, for decades, we have really looked at perhaps the worst cases of particular conditions in front of us that then are considered for neuromodulation. So the degree of suffering, whether it's a tremor, whether it's a gait disorder, whether it's pain, whether it's bladder or bowel dysfunction, we probably, as individuals, have looked at that and seen the suffering and really focused on alleviating that suffering. We probably haven't been as focused on what is the economic cost per unit return for society for that. We've looked at it on an individual basis. Now, with cost-constrained healthcare systems, of course, we're now being asked to justify ethical relief of suffering, now to justify that more in terms of an economic framework. And that's something that we are grappling with and probably need to deal with both better and on an ongoing basis. I don't think you can ever let go of the fact that we are aiming to reduce human suffering. And I sometimes question, can you even really put a price on that, so to speak, and the ethics around that. Separately, we've got, and this is going to be an area that involves long-term questions as we evolve the area, and it's going to involve ethicists and jurists and others, is the issue of artificial intelligence, and in particular, for example, the brain-computer interface area. So we're going to have to decide if we are giving remote computers decision-making power on how to change algorithms that are then given back into a patient that changes that patient, changes their brain thinking, for example. Where are the ethics around that?
Mm.
Who controls who, for example? I don't have the answers. And if they were simple, we could write the laws now. So these things are going to evolve over time. But if we don't come and put a framework around that before the scientists come up with things, we're going to be scrabbling retrospectively. And that's when things go off the guardrails.
Can you share what organizations or bodies you feel are responsible to develop these guidelines?
It probably won't be just one group. I think we really need to involve philosophers. We need to involve government. We need to involve clinicians. We need to involve patients. So many groups need to come together, if you like, almost to have a summit to start discussing these sort of things. And perhaps that'll be a feature of future presidencies of the INS, for example, is to help encourage these sort of conversations. We're not the only organization that has thoughts around this process, but that's going to be really important to do that, to try and build a regulatory ecosystem and make sure that it all happens for the greater good and isn't used for other purposes.
Do you have any guesstimate of how long you think the timeline will be before these things start to be quite pressing in the field?
If you look at the progress in technology and the computing power as a percentage or fraction of the human mind computing power, they say that the singularity, which is where artificial intelligence becomes as capable as a human brain of computational output, is going to occur somewhere between 2035 to 2065. It's not that far away. It's probably, hopefully, that's within my lifetime. So I think we've got time, but we definitely need to get on the job of thinking around what that means when the AI is more intelligent than we are.
One thing that's important to remember as we connect with someone who's the president of this society is that you're also a practicing clinician and have a robust career. Throughout your experience during this presidency, do you have any notable patient stories that come from your clinical practice that you can share to add color to what your work outside of the society looks like?
To some extent, I think every patient story has meaning, has merit. So the person who goes from semi-bedbound to garden, they don't reach the papers. They don't feature on slides in a seminar or a meeting. But that's just as important as perhaps the person who dramatically changes their lives. So I value each and every improvement. And I might have a little private fist bump episode after seeing a good outcome. Having said that, I can think of a couple of patients. One in particular, used his first name, but not his last name. So Grant was a chap who was in the military, and he was parachuting out of a helicopter when his chute got tangled with another individual, and he basically slammed into the ground with multiple fractures and nearly died. So he was a pretty busted up chap with chronic pain. And he ended up with a neuromodulation device after conservative therapies didn't really do much for him. And he told me before I implanted him that he said, if this works, I'm going to run a triathlon, a full triathlon. And I said, let's just work on simpler targets. But lo and behold, it did work, and remarkably well. And he ran a triathlon, and now he's run multiple triathlons, which kind of freaks me out every time he does one. But so far, everything's going well. And he certainly has been an inspiration to me and to others.
That's a great story. So reflecting on all of this, what are your next steps as you move beyond your presidency?
Some downtime. Coming from Australia and the time zones, I generally start my working day before 5 a.m. doing calls for the States. Then I finish my normal working day, and then around 10 p.m. I start my calls from Europe. It's intense. And so I will take well-earned downtime to relax, recharge the batteries after 3 years, and then I think open myself up to opportunity. Often people think that perhaps if you get to be president of an international society, you've had a clear career path and you've mapped everything out. For myself, nothing could be further from the truth. I have ridden on the waves of where opportunity arose. And so I will continue to just open doors and walk through them and see where fun and collegiality and scientific endeavor can all mix together, and where that can all come together. That's where I want to be.
We have the pleasure of recording today from Vancouver. We're at the 16th World Congress of the INS. I'm curious, you just flew here from Australia. How much sleep have you had in the last couple of days?
Not much, so even less than I normally get. But I'll be right on track by the time it finishes, and then a time to go home and reverse it. But look, I'm really looking forward to this Congress. I've got a whole bunch of meetings, but anytime I can get out of a meeting and jump into the actual hall, I learn something every time. Every day I learn something. And so that to me is the benefit. No matter how many years you've been in the field, to come home and be a better doctor than when you left and be able to use that for patients come Monday morning, that to me is a great gift.
I will say that it's been a gift to learn from you during my time in the society. So thank you very much for the generous offerings that you've brought to neuromodulation.
Oh, you're welcome, Mandy. My pleasure.
With that, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today and for being the impetus of this show being developed. The society has benefited immensely over the course of your presidency. We have the utmost gratitude for your work.
Oh, thank you.